So in 1789, a little-known event called the French Revolution happened, where some peasants said, "Hey, maybe absolute monarchy and widespread poverty aren't really working out for us," accidentally lighting France on fire for years on end, until an averagely tall guy called Napoleon swept in and became Consul of France, then Emperor of France, then Emperor of half of Europe. One of these places in the parts of Europe he ruled over was Italy, which was where he got the whole Consul and Emperor thing from. Sadly, all of the monarchs of literally everywhere he hadn't conquered didn't like him taking all of what used to be their stuff, and so formed a coalition to take him down. Then another coalition, then 4 more, then a final one just to be sure. After all that, they sat down in Vienna and discussed what Europe should look like so something like this wouldn't threaten their power again. What they came up with mostly worked too, with the notable drawback that not all of their people liked their new rulers, seeing a lot of merit to stuff like liberalism and nationalism. Italy was one of the places that liked these ideas, and secret societies, such as the Carbonari, started to spring up across Italy, trying to push through reforms and stir up revolts. This didn't work too well, as what little progress they made was soon undone by the Austrian army. Speaking of Austria, they had been given quite a lot of power in Italy during the Congress of Vienna, being given control over Lombardy and Venice, as well as being allies with many of the states in Italy, such as Tuscany, with only the kingdom of Piedmont-Sardinia being fully free from Austrian influence. Keep your eye on this, it's slightly important later, I don't know. So things are decent, not great, not terrible. Then, 1848 happens. Basically, in 1848, everyone in Europe all decided to go up in arms against their overlords at once, a 19th century version of storming Area 51, but with a lot more success. In Italy, kingdoms such as Tuscany and Sicily had to give in to constitutional government. More importantly, Austria, which has never been that homogeneous anyways, had to deal with practically 100 different separatist groups all wanting less Austria in their lives. Guess who else wanted less Austria? Venice and Lombardy. Guess who else thought less Austria would be cool, as well as more Piedmont-Sardinia? None other than the King of Piedmont-Sardinia, a certain Charles Albert, who gave in to demands for a constitution and also invaded Lombardy. This went pretty well at first, then much less well, because it turns out it isn't easy to take on a great power once they get their act together. He decided to quit once this happened, letting his son, Victor Emmanuel II, deal with the problems of a peace treaty. Elsewhere in Italy, the revolts also started to fail, although Republican forces did briefly seize Rome, driving out the Pope, who had been previously in charge, led by the revolutionary Giuseppe Mazzini. France, despite being a republic under Napoleon, no, not that one, did not like this, and came to the aid of the Pope, forcing Mazzini to flee to San Marino. So, kind of a fail overall. Lombardy and Venice are still controlled by Austria, most of those reforms didn't work out, Rome is basically occupied by France.
Wait, wasn't this supposed to be more successful than raiding Area 51?
Well, there were some changes for the better. Piedmont kept its liberal constitution, for example, and also it got a new flag, which would later on become the flag of Italy. The new constitution took some power out of the hands of the king and put some into the hands of the prime minister, the most important one being a guy called Camillo Benso, the Count of Cavour. He was a good prime minister, advocating for free trade, which helped boost the Piedmontese economy. He also decided to take reforms slowly, as to avoid all of the violence that had happened whenever people tried to push through changes earlier. All of this gave Piedmont a lot more power than it used to have, which it flexed in such ways as participating in the Crimean War against Russia, and generally trying to make alliances against Austria. He mostly didn't get much sympathy, except for where he very much did in France of all places, which was now an empire, yet again led by Discount Napoleon. Despite the fact that supporting a newly aggressive kingdom on your border doesn't tend to go well most of the time, Napoleon III had been a member of the Carbonari when he was younger, and thus was all for Piedmont uniting Italy, as long as the Papal States were kept intact and France remained vaguely in charge, of course. Soon after this was agreed upon, a revolt happened in central Italy, which Piedmont was all for. Austria was very much not all for this, telling them they should go away or else. France, probably looming over Austria for dramatic effect, told them that they should stick themselves, and that no one liked their jawline. After doing most of the heavy lifting, France pieced out, which Piedmont wasn't too happy about, but hey, at least they got Lombardy. France also got some of Piedmont's western territory that had a few French people in it, but hey, who cares. Central Italy, which had united into its own thing by this point, could be generously described as a dumpster fire, which led them to go over to Piedmont basically begging to be annexed. Seeing nothing wrong with this plan, Victor Emmanuel obliged. This enraged France, because the united provinces of Central Italy had taken some papal territory with it, when Napoleon III had promised to protect. Not San Marino, though, because when Mazzini had fled there, he basically promised it would get to stay its own thing, resulting in a tiny microstate lodged in Italy's armpit to this day. So where were we? Oh yeah, right, anticlimactic peace deal and all that. Things were relatively quiet for a while, until Sicily decided to revolt for the billionth time in the century. This time, however, Giuseppe, not the first one, a new guy called Giuseppe Garibaldi, jumped at the opportunity, gathering just 1,000 men and taking over the island. That was impressive enough, but he decided to go further and invade the rest of Sicily. Piedmont disagreed with his use of cheat codes, but he wasn't about to look a gift Sicily in the mouth, so they helped with the invasion, taking more papal territory along the way, except for Rome and the surrounding area, which they stayed out of. Garibaldi shortly handed over Naples and Sicily to Piedmont, which was kind of a big deal, seeing as he was a Republican, and thus really didn't like kings. But hey, as long as it gets Italy out of it, it's worth it, right? On the 17th of May, 1861, the Kingdom of Italy was proclaimed, with the capital being moved to Florence. Italy was basically united at this point, but there were still problems. For instance, this unified country meant that southern Italy couldn't protect its industry from the far more industrialized north, and thus quickly fell into decline. This led to bandits roaming the south and what was known as the Brigands' War. Also, there were a few revolts here and there, some led by Garibaldi himself, who didn't get punished because he was widely loved by now. The Pope also didn't like Italy for fairly obvious reasons. It was also a bit of a challenge to create a united identity for the Italians in the first place, because while things like the Renaissance, the Roman Empire, the past few decades of war, and others had displayed a sort of common identity, there were arguably just as many things dividing them. All of this was manageable, but there were two things that Italy absolutely needed to have: Venice and Rome, both owned or protected by Austria and France respectively. As an American, I can confirm this is a huge problem, as Rome and Venice are the only two cities in Italy that anyone here in my country can even name. Austria wasn't going to let go of Venice if they had their way with things, but luckily for Italy, Austria did not have their way with things, as Prussia was gaining power to their north and aggressively trying to unify Germany under Otto von Bismarck. This led to a war with Austria, which Italy decided to join in to get Venice. Overall, they didn't do well, but Prussia did great, so Austria finally decided to hand over Venice to the true victors of the war, the people who most deserved it, the nation who had proved itself incomparable on the battlefield, France! Yeah, I was confused when I heard that too. So was Napoleon III, who gave it to Italy, as he didn't really want Venice anyways, and hadn't even been in the war. He was, however, in the next war with Prussia, declaring war on them over a perceived insult on a telegraph, which is always a wonderful thing to do. This rapidly started to go badly for him, so he had to withdraw his troops from Rome to deal with the fact that Paris was now under siege. This left the remainder of the Papal States as an easy target, which led to the Italians marching in, the Pope complaining, and Rome being declared the new capital of Italy. And so finally, in 1870, Italy was unified after a bunch of wars, revolutions, grumpy popes, clever diplomacy, and more. A new great power was born, one which would not take over the Mediterranean or form a particularly large empire in general, but hey, we gotta start somewhere. It's cool. There's a new country in Europe. Hey, the less border gore in Italy, it's just nice. Yeah.